welcome back to LeEdFollow. And after the track day at KnockHill, we're going to be trying to figure out why this brake is binding on the front of GT86. Let me just show you this that I see. You see there's like a rusty patch just here on the disc. It's only in this one patch. It looks like at some point the car's parked and the disc and the pad have probably just rusted a little bit together. It's so very slight that I didn't even notice when I was inspecting the brakes the first time round, but just to make sure I cover as many possible things that could be causing this, I'm going to just take a little bit of sandpaper to this and just try to get rid of it, just try to smooth it out so the whole surface of the disc is nice and shiny. Okay, so you can still see it, but you can't really feel it anymore, so I think that's probably been a good thing to do. I just need to do the same on the back. So I'm thinking maybe as the disc is going past the pads with this blob of caliper dust on them, so I'm just going to give both sides a clean because they're nice and smooth. There's no deforming of the disc that I can see, and then probably what I'll do is I'll remove the pads and see if the pads are in a good condition, because everything seems to be straight. I bought a spare wheel bearing just on the off chance that it could be that's causing it, but everything seems to be traveling nice and straight and true now, so probably not going to need that. Okay, I think I might have found the culprit. So the disc rotates fine, doesn't seem to drag much as it rotates, but if you keep spinning it over and over again, it starts to drag a little bit. So as the heat builds up, it's starting to catch a bit and it's not spinning true. So I've taken the split pins out. The top one came out really easy, but the bottom one was really stuck in there. So I wonder if the bottom of the pad was actually catching as it couldn't move freely. But anyway, let me show you what I've done. So let's get in here and have a look. So see, all the pistons are where they should be. The disc all looks fine. The pads, if I show you the pad wear, pads are all fine. Nothing wrong with those pads. They've got loads of life left in them. I mean, this kit was only fitted a couple of thousand miles ago. We can see from the other side as well, we've got 6 nice ring marks. So the pistons are hitting where they're supposed to be hitting. So what I think it is, going to these two pins, this one, the cleaner one of the two, came at the top, nice and easy, very little force to get that out. The bottom one didn't come out so easy, and actually when we look at the top of this, we can see the actual retaining pin is mangled. I don't know whether that's because of when I've removed it or not, but that could be why it's stuck in there. So I'm going to straighten that out, I'm going to clean everything up, I'm going to put everything back together, and we're going to see how nicely it rotates then. But it doesn't look like it's actually the wheel bearing after all. Okay, so I'm going to have to admit defeat on this. I tried to repair the split pin, the retaining pin. Doesn't seem to want to go back into place. So let me just show you the difference between the two. So that's the broken one. As you can see, the collar is just totally mangled, and that's what it should look like. It should be perfectly flush. Now, I've tried to straighten it out, but the problem is, even if I do straighten that out, will I be confident enough to go and put it back in the car and do a track day? Probably not, to be honest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put everything back together with one pin. Just put the wheel back on so that I don't have to leave the car on a jack and axle stands overnight. I'm going to get onto the internet, see if I can order 2 new ones. I don't want to put an old one and a new one back in, so I put 2 new ones in. Hopefully, if I can get those in time for the weekend, I can take this thing to Cadwell Park. If not, I'll have to miss it, because there's no way I'm putting a damaged split pin back in, not with the kind of abuse that you give a car on track. But the good thing is, I didn't need to fit a new wheel bearing. That was nice. The only problem is, because I'm that kind of guy who rushes out and gets parts before he actually diagnoses the problem because he wants to be prepared, I now have a wheel bearing that I don't need to fit. However, seeing as I'm here, let me show you how to change a wheel bearing anyway. Okay, so even though we're not going to do it today, let me show you how to change a wheel bearing on one of these. The first thing you need to do is take the disc and the caliper off, and of course these are not standard discs and calipers, but the principle remains the same. So at the back of the caliper here, you have 2 bolts around about here and here on the back, and they retain the caliper onto the hub. So you need to undo those first, and then once the caliper's off, you can then take the disc off, and then I can show you how to undo the wheel hub. So the wheel bearings are quite simple on these. So the hub itself behind here is held on with 4 bolts, and if I just move the camera around, I can hopefully show you these from behind. So we're here at the back of the hub, okay, and what you can see is the back of the wheel bearing, 4 bolts, and then just down in the corner here, you can see here's one of the bolts that holds the caliper on, and then there's another one, I don't know whether you can get it because of the wishbone in the way, but there's another one up here. So it's essentially those 2 hold the caliper on. Now, you can't see the heads on these because of the way Cosworth do the brakes, but on the standard caliper, you have 2 bolt heads, one here and one at the top. So once you've got the caliper off, once you've got the disc off, you can see now the wheel bearing bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. You undo those from the back of the hub, and then you can just pop the hub straight out the front. Right, and let me show you what a new wheel bearing looks like. So here's a new wheel bearing part number. Like I said, doesn't look like I actually need to fit this because I think my brake judder is down to that retaining pin. But here's the new wheel bearing. As you can see, it's got a hub, and then on the back, if I just put this down on the table, you'll see that it has these 4 bolt holes that I showed you at the back of the hub. Okay, so one of the things you should probably do as well is get 4 new bolts, because bolts tend to fatigue over time, they tend to stretch. So I've got 4 new ones. These are the part numbers for them. And yeah, like I said, I'm not going to be using this now, so what I'll probably do is just put it on a shelf, and with the amount of abuse that the car gives the brakes on track and the wheel bearings, then I suspect at some point in the future this will be required. So I've got one in the bank ready to fit when needed. Okay, welcome back. It's been a couple of days because I was waiting on the new pin to turn up, but as you can see, got a nice clean one here compared to the old one with a twisted retainer on the end of it. So I'm going to fit it and see if that fixes the issue with the brakes. Right, so rather than just throwing the new pin in, to try to make sure that the actual brake pads move nice and freely, I'm going to just put a little bit of copper slip onto the new pin, and then hopefully that will be enough just to make sure that nothing binds when it gets hot. Okay, so pushing in the pin from the back, and that should just wiggle through and go into place. There you go, just needs a little tap to locate it properly, and then I've just got to do a new top one as well. Okay, so they're both tapped from behind now, and I just need to pop that in and down. There we go, and then that locates like that, just stops the pins from coming loose. Okay, so just a case of putting the wheel back on now, taking it for a spin, finding some nice corners to build some heat up, making sure we've got no more judder. Okay, so the wheel's back on, and straight away when I was spinning it while it was up on the jack, it's a lot freer than it used to be. It's a lot more like the other side. It's not catching on every other rotation like it was doing before. So hopefully it was just that bump, that rusty patch that was on the disc, or it was a sticking lower pin, because that pin was definitely damaged, the one that I took out. So gonna take it out now, fingers crossed, see what happens. Oh, it's had a battery. That's a good one. Leaving the house with a flat GoPro, not a good start. Okay, so we're back out on the road, trying to get in a little bit of driving before it gets too dark. But so far, it seems okay, the brakes. But I haven't got the temperature in them, so I'm just trying to bring up the temperature. You know, where safe to do so, just putting on the brakes and building up that heat as quickly as I can. and then we'll see if we get any judder. I'm not going to be able to get it to judder like it was doing on track, but if I can just get it to do a little bit of judder, that would suggest to me that it's going to be a lot of bit of judder when we're actually giving it some proper abuse on track. So far so good. Yeah, it brakes really well. It brakes really well. ABS kicks in. Well, nothing so far. I mean, of course, the kind of abuse that I'm giving the pads now is nowhere like the kind of abuse that they would get on track. So it's not an exact science, unfortunately. So hopefully either that pin or just sanding down the surface rust from that disc has done it. But yeah, luckily I didn't need that wheel bearing after all. It's not wasted money, because with inflation, one day I will need that wheel bearing, and it's cheaper that I get it now in 2022 than I hate to think how much that same wheel bearing will cost in 2032. When it got hot, that 1,000th of a millimetre of rust that was probably on the surface, I can barely feel my finger, that probably became quite a big bump in the surface of the disc with the kind of abuse and the kind of temperatures that the track day puts into the system. Because now it's fine, I don't see any issues, but unfortunately I can't simulate the kind of temperatures you get on a track day, so who knows. The bottom line is, right now I can't find anything wrong with this car that would stop me taking it for another track day, so we'll see how we get on. Oh god, the brakes on this thing are amazing. I know you're going to laugh, but I got a Corolla hybrid, and that's what I daily, and every time I get back into the 86, I keep forgetting how good the brakes are, because you've got none of that regen stuff. It's just straight onto pad, and what a hell of a set of pads. Brakes on this thing are absolute monsters. And let's get up a bit of speed. We'll do one more brake. Nothing. No. I can't feel any of that judder whatsoever. So yeah, that was a bit of an uneventful video. I'm sorry, but still, most important thing is I'm confident and I'm good to go for Cadwell. So I'll be signing off now, guys, and I'll see you at the weekend when we go to Cadwell with Ed. Bye for now.